Danny, Cole, wiped the grease from his hands and looked out the small window of the engine room, watching the stars drift by like scattered diamonds against the endless black of space, and he wondered if his mother back on Earth ever looked up at the same sky and thought of him. He was nobody special, just a mechanic on the cargo vessel Horizon's Edge, a ship that carried supplies between human colonies in the outer reaches of explored space, and he had been doing this job for 7 years now, fixing broken pipes, repairing engine parts, and keeping the old ship running when it should have been retired long ago. The ship shook suddenly, and Danny grabbed the wall to steady himself as alarms began to blare throughout the vessel, filling every corridor with flashing red lights and that terrible sound that meant something had gone very wrong. He ran toward the bridge, his boots pounding against the metal floor, and when he arrived, he found Captain Ben Harper standing, frozen at the viewport, his face pale and his hands trembling at his sides. Danny followed the captain's gaze and felt his heart stop beating for just a moment. A ship hung in the darkness before them, but to call it a ship seemed almost insulting, because it was more like a floating city, a massive structure of silver metal and glowing blue lights that stretched for miles in every direction, blocking out the stars like a giant hand covering the sun. "What is that thing?" Danny whispered, though he already knew the answer deep in his gut. Katie Morgan, the ship's communication officer and Danny's closest friend since childhood, turned from her console with fear written across her face. "It's Valanthe," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "One of their warships, and Danny, it's the biggest one I've ever seen on any record." The Valanthe were legends, stories that parents told their children to make them behave, tales of silver-skinned giants who had conquered 1,000 worlds and ruled an empire that stretched across half the galaxy, and they viewed other species the way humans might view insects crawling across a kitchen floor. Danny had heard the stories of what happened to ships that crossed paths with the Valanthe, how entire crews vanished without a trace, how colonies went silent overnight, how resistance was not just futile, but laughable against beings who had mastered space travel when humans were still living in caves. "They're hailing us," Katie said, and her fingers hovered over the controls, like she was afraid to touch them. Captain Harper took a deep breath and squared his shoulders, trying to look brave, even though everyone on the bridge could see his hands shaking. "Open the channel," he commanded. The main screen flickered to life, and Danny saw Valanthe for the first time in his life, and the sight made his knees feel weak. The alien stood nearly 8 feet tall, with skin like polished silver and eyes that glowed with an inner light like blue flames trapped behind glass. And when it spoke, its voice seemed to come from everywhere at once, filling the bridge and echoing inside Danny's skull. "Human vessel," the alien said, and its tone carried the weight of absolute authority. "You will power down your engines and prepare to be boarded, and you will not resist, and you will not flee, and you will comply immediately." Captain Harper opened his mouth to respond, but before he could speak, the alien continued. "We do not come to destroy you, humans, though we could end your existence with a thought. And we do not come to enslave you, though you would make adequate servants. And instead, we come with a summons." Danny felt Katie grab his arm, her fingers digging into his skin with desperate strength. "A summons?" Captain Harper asked, finding his voice at last. "The Empress Valora, ruler of 10,000 worlds and guardian of the Eternal Flame, has requested the presence of a human at her palace on Calith Prime, and she has requested specifically that this human be male, and she has made clear that this request is not optional." The bridge fell silent, and Danny could hear nothing but the pounding of his own heart and the soft hum of the ship's systems. and he wondered if this was some kind of terrible dream. "Why?" Captain Harper demanded. "Why does your Empress want one of my crew?" The alien's glowing eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Danny thought they had made a fatal mistake by questioning the command. "The reasons of the Empress are not for lesser beings to understand," the alien replied. "You have 1 hour to select your offering, and if you do not comply, we will select for you, and the selection will not be gentle." The screen went dark, and the bridge erupted into chaos. Everyone was talking at once, shouting and arguing, and demanding answers that nobody had. Danny stood in the middle of it all, feeling like the floor had dropped out from under his feet. Captain Harper raised his hands and called for silence, and slowly the noise died down, until only the sound of fearful breathing filled the room. "We have to send someone," the captain said, and his voice was heavy with a weight that no man should have to carry. "If we don't, they'll kill us all, and I need a volunteer." Nobody moved, and nobody spoke, and Danny understood their fear, because he felt it too, felt it crawling through his veins like ice water. Katie looked at him with tears in her eyes, and he knew what she was thinking, knew that she was terrified of losing him, but also terrified of what would happen if nobody stepped forward. Danny thought about his life, thought about the years he had spent fixing engines and dreaming of something more. Thought about how he had always felt like he was waiting for something without knowing what it was. He thought about the people on this ship. About Katie, who had been his friend since they were children playing in the dirt streets of their small town. About Captain Harper, who had given him a job when nobody else would. About the 12 other crew members who had families waiting for them back home. He stepped forward before he could talk himself out of it. "I'll go," Danny said, and his voice sounded strange in his own ears, steady and calm when everything inside him was screaming to run and hide. Katie grabbed his arm again, harder this time, and her voice cracked when she spoke his name. "Danny, no, you can't. There has to be another way." He turned to face her, and managed something that was almost like a smile. "There isn't another way, Katie, and we both know it. And if someone has to go, it might as well be me." The hour passed like seconds, and like centuries all at once, and when the Valanthi guards came aboard to collect him, Danny walked toward them with his head held high, even though his legs felt like water. The guards were massive, towering over him like living statues of silver and blue, and they said nothing as they escorted him through the airlock and into their ship. Danny looked back one last time and saw Katie standing at the viewport, her hand pressed against the glass, and he raised his own hand in farewell before the door closed between them. As the alien vessel pulled away from the horizon's edge, Danny watched through a window as his ship grew smaller and smaller, until it was just another point of light among the stars. He did not know what waited for him on Calith Prime, did not know why an alien empress wanted to see a human, and did not know if he would ever see his home again. But as the ship jumped into faster-than-light travel, and the stars stretched into lines of brilliant white around him, Danny Cole made a silent promise to himself. Whatever came next, he would face it standing, because that was what humans did, and no matter how powerful these aliens were, they would learn that humanity did not break easily. The journey to Calith Prime took 3 days, and during that time, Danny saw wonders that made his mind struggle to understand what his eyes were showing him. He passed through systems where planets had been shaped like sculptures, carved into massive faces or geometric patterns by beings with power beyond human imagination. And he flew past space stations the size of moons, where millions of aliens lived and worked, and never thought twice about the empire that ruled them. The Valanthi guards did not speak to him, did not answer his questions, and did not seem to notice him at all, except when it was time to bring him food or escort him to a sleeping chamber. And Danny felt like a package being delivered rather than a person being transported. When the ship finally arrived at Calith Prime, Danny pressed his face against the viewport and forgot how to breathe. The planet was beautiful in a way that hurt to look at, covered in cities of crystal and glass that caught the light of 3 suns and scattered it into rainbows that danced across the atmosphere. And floating above the surface were platforms and palaces that defied gravity, suspended by technology that Danny could not begin to understand. The ship descended through layers of clouds and past towers that stretched miles into the sky. And everywhere Danny looked, he saw Valanthi going about their lives, walking on bridges of pure light, flying in personal vehicles that moved without sound, and gazing down at the arriving vessel with expressions of mild curiosity and obvious superiority. They landed in a courtyard made of something that looked like white marble, but felt warm beneath Danny's feet, when the guards finally escorted him off the ship. And waiting for him was a group of aliens who were clearly servants based on their simpler clothing and downcast eyes. "You will be prepared," one of the servants said, and before Danny could ask what that meant, they had taken him by the arms and led him into a building that sparkled with embedded gems. The next several hours were the strangest of Danny's life. He was bathed in pools of water that glowed with soft blue light and smelled like flowers he had never encountered. And servants scrubbed his skin until it was pink and raw, and they washed his hair with oils that made it shine like he had never known it could. They dressed him in robes of deep purple fabric that felt lighter than air against his skin, and they placed bands of silver metal around his wrists and a chain of glittering stones around his neck. And when Danny looked at himself in the mirror they showed him, he barely recognized the person staring back. "You look almost acceptable," one of the servants said, and Danny could not tell if this was meant as a compliment or an insult. They led him through corridors that seemed to go on forever, past doors of gold and walls covered in paintings that moved like living scenes, past fountains that flowed upward instead of down, and past windows that looked out onto gardens where plants grew in colors that did not exist on Earth. And then they brought him to the court of 1,000 stars, and everything Danny thought he knew about grandeur was proven to be small and meaningless. The chamber was vast beyond description, a room so large that clouds actually formed near the ceiling and drifted lazily through the air, and the floor was made of something transparent that showed the stars moving beneath it as if they were standing on a window into space itself. Thousands of aliens filled the room, representatives of hundreds of different species, and Danny recognized none of them except for the Valanthi who stood scattered among the crowd like silver flames among lesser lights. And every single one of these beings fell silent and turned to look at him as he was led toward the center of the room. The throne that seemed to be carved from a single massive crystal sat Empress Valora. Danny had thought the guards were impressive, had thought the Valanthi commander who hailed his ship was terrifying, but they were nothing compared to her. She stood nearly 8 feet tall even while seated, and her skin was not just silver, but seemed to contain galaxies within it, swirling patterns of light that moved beneath the surface like living constellations. And her eyes were pools of pure starlight that fixed upon Danny with an intensity that made him want to fall to his knees. But he did not kneel, because something inside him, something stubborn and human and impossible to explain, refused to bow before anyone, no matter how powerful they might be. A gasp went through the court, and Danny heard whispers spreading like fire through dry grass. "He does not kneel," someone hissed. "Insolent creature," another voice snarled. "He should be destroyed for such disrespect," a third demanded. But Empress Valora raised one hand, a simple gesture that brought instant silence to the entire chamber. And then she did something that shocked every being present. She rose from her throne and descended the steps toward Danny. "Your Majesty," one of her advisors called out in alarm, "you cannot approach the creature. It is beneath you. It is improper. Valora ignored the protest and continued walking until she stood directly before Danny, so close that he could feel the warmth radiating from her skin and smell something like ozone and honey in the air around her. She was terrifying and beautiful and ancient and curious all at once, and when she spoke, her voice echoed inside Danny's mind as well as his ears. "Human," she said, "your kind has intrigued me, and I have spent many years studying your species from afar, watching your struggles and your triumphs and your endless capacity for survival." Danny swallowed hard, but forced himself to meet her gaze. "You are fragile," Valora continued. "Your bodies are weak, your lives are short, your technology is primitive, and your world is insignificant in the vastness of our empire." The court murmured in agreement, and Danny could feel the contempt radiating from the assembled aliens. "And yet," the Empress said, and her voice dropped to something almost like wonder, "you do not break." The chamber went quiet again, but this time the silence was different, confused rather than hostile. "I have conquered 10,000 worlds," Valora said. "I have brought 100 species under my rule, and every single one of them eventually submitted, eventually accepted their place, eventually forgot what it meant to hope for anything other than what we allowed them to have." She reached out and touched Danny's face with one long silver finger, and her skin was warm and strange against his cheek. "But not humans," she whispered. "Every world where we have taken your kind as servants, they resist, they plot, they dream of freedom, they tell stories of Earth to their children, and promise that someday they will return." Danny felt tears forming in his eyes, thinking of all those humans trapped on alien worlds, holding on to hope against impossible odds. "I do not understand it," Valora admitted, and there was genuine confusion in her ancient voice. "I have lived for 12,000 years, and I have never encountered a species that refuses to accept defeat." She stepped back and looked at Danny with those impossible eyes. "This is why I have brought you here," human called Danny Cole, "and this is what I desire from you." The court leaned forward, hundreds of species waiting to hear the Empress speak. "I want you to teach me," Valora said. "Teach me what makes humanity unbreakable. Teach me the secret of your stubborn hope. Teach me how creatures so small and weak and brief can possess spirits that even my power cannot crush." Danny stared at her in disbelief, and for a long moment he could not find any words. An Empress who ruled half the galaxy was asking him, a simple mechanic from a cargo ship, to teach her about being human. It was absurd. It was impossible. It was the strangest thing that had ever happened in the history of strange things. And Danny realized that for the first time since this nightmare began, he was not afraid. He was curious. "All right," he said finally, and his voice was steady in the silent court. "I'll try." And somewhere in the depths of Valora's starlight eyes, Danny thought he saw something that might have been a smile. The weeks that followed were unlike anything Danny could have imagined when he woke up each morning in his chambers in the Imperial Palace. He had been given rooms that were larger than the entire cargo ship he used to work on, filled with furniture that adjusted to his comfort automatically, and windows that could display any view in the galaxy with just a spoken command. And servants waited outside his door at all hours, ready to bring him food or clothing or anything else he might desire. But the luxury meant nothing compared to the strangeness of his new purpose. Every afternoon, Empress Valora would summon him to her private garden, a vast enclosed space where plants from 1,000 conquered worlds grew in careful harmony, where waterfalls flowed into pools of crystal-clear liquid, and where the air smelt different with every breath depending on which direction the wind was blowing. She would sit on a bench made of living wood that had grown into that shape over centuries. And Danny would sit beside her, and she would ask him questions that he never knew how to answer. "Tell me about human weakness," she said during their first meeting in the garden. Danny thought about the question for a long time before responding. "We are weak," he admitted. "We get sick easily. We age and die in what must seem like moments to you. We cannot survive in space without protection, and we cannot lift heavy objects or run very fast compared to many other species." "And yet you do not despair," Valora observed. "You do not accept these limitations as the end of your potential, and I find this confusing." Danny tried to think of how to explain something that felt so natural to him. "There was a woman," he said finally, "my grandmother, Emma Cole, and she lived in a small town on Earth where there was a factory that made parts for spaceships." Valora listened with that intense focus that never seemed to. "One day, the factory collapsed," Danny continued. "The roof fell in and buried dozens of workers under metal and concrete, and my grandmother was one of them." "She died?" Valora asked. "No," Danny said. "She was trapped under a beam for 16 hours, with a broken leg and 3 cracked ribs, and she could have given up, could have closed her eyes and let the darkness take her, but she didn't." He paused, remembering the stories his grandmother had told him when he was young. "She sang songs to keep herself awake," Danny said. "She talked to the other trapped workers, encouraged them, kept them believing that help was coming, even when hours passed without any sign of rescue." "Why would she do this?" Valora asked, and there was genuine curiosity in her voice. "Because that's what humans do," Danny replied. "We don't give up, not because we think we'll definitely win, but because giving up feels wrong in a way we can't explain." Was silent for a long moment. "After they rescued her," Danny said, "she went home to find that her husband had died of a heart attack while she was trapped, shocked by the news of the collapse, and she was left alone with 4 children and no money and no job." "This is a story of tragedy," Valora observed. "I do not understand why you tell it as if it were something to admire." "Because she raised all 4 of those children by herself," Danny said. "She worked 3 jobs. She went without food so they could eat. She stayed up late helping them with schoolwork, even when she was exhausted, and every single one of them grew up to live good lives." He looked at the Empress and saw confusion written across her ancient features. "She never complained," Danny said. "She never asked why this happened to her. She never blamed the universe for being unfair. She just kept going, because that's what needed to be done." Valora story after story. He told her about astronauts who knew they might die in the cold vacuum of space, but launched anyway because exploration was worth the risk. He told her about soldiers who carried wounded friends for miles through hostile territory because leaving someone behind was unthinkable. He told her about doctors who worked without sleep to save lives, about teachers who spent their own money on supplies for poor students, about parents who worked themselves to exhaustion so their children could have better futures. He told her about artists who created beauty even in the darkest times, about musicians who played concerts in bombed cities, about writers who penned poems in prison cells, and slowly, Danny began to see something change in the Empress. "Your species celebrates struggle," she said one evening, as the artificial sun set over the garden and painted the sky in shades of orange and purple. "We do," Danny agreed. "People do not understand this," Valora admitted. "We have conquered all challenges. We have eliminated all threats. We have achieved everything we ever desired, and yet—" She paused, and for the first time Danny saw something like sadness in her eyes. "We have not created anything new in 10,000 years, she said. "We have not written songs or poems. We have not painted pictures or told stories. We have not dreamed of anything beyond what we already possess." Danny thought about this for a moment. "Maybe that's the problem," he said carefully. "Maybe you need struggle to create. Maybe you need challenge to grow. Maybe you need the possibility of failure to make success mean anything." Valora looked at him with those starlight eyes, You are saying that our strength has become our weakness. I'm saying that a life without risk is a life without meaning, Danny replied. Humans create because we know our time is short. We love fiercely because we know we might lose what we love. We hope desperately because despair is always waiting just around the corner. The Empress rose from the bench and walked to the edge of a pool where glowing fish swam in lazy circles. I have lived for 12,000 years, she said quietly. I have seen empires rise and fall. I have watched stars be born and die. I have experienced things that no human mind could comprehend. She turned to face Danny, and in all that time, I have never felt what you describe. This desperate hope, this fierce love, this determination to continue despite knowing that failure is possible. Danny stood and walked to stand beside her. Maybe that's what I'm here to teach you, he said. Not facts or information, but a way of feeling that your people have forgotten. Valora was quiet for a long time, staring at the fish as they swam their endless circles. There are those in my court who believe I have made a mistake bringing you here, she said finally. They think humans are dangerous, that your stubborn hope is a disease that could spread to our subject species and cause rebellion throughout the Empire. Danny felt a chill run down his spine. Are they right? He asked. The Empress turned to look at him, and something flickered in her ancient eyes, something that might have been the very first spark of hope she had ever felt. Perhaps, she said, but perhaps that disease is exactly what my dying empire needs. She reached out and placed her hand on Danny's shoulder, and her touch was warm and strange and somehow comforting. Continue teaching me, Danny Cole, she said. Show me what it means to be human, and perhaps together we can save both our peoples. Danny nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle onto his shoulders like a heavy cloak. He was no longer just a mechanic from a cargo ship. He was an ambassador for his entire species, and the future of humanity might depend on what he could teach an alien empress about hope. Not everyone in the Volanthi Empire was pleased with the Empress's growing fascination with the human visitor, and Danny learned this truth in the most frightening way possible. He was walking through the palace corridors late one night, unable to sleep and hoping that a walk might tire him enough to find rest, when a massive silver hand grabbed him from behind and dragged him into a dark alcove. Danny tried to cry out, but another hand clamped over his mouth, and he found himself staring up into the glowing eyes of a Volanthi warrior, who radiated hatred like heat from a furnace. Do not scream, little human, the warrior growled. I only wish to talk, and if you cooperate, you might survive this conversation. The hand released Danny's mouth, and he gasped for air while trying to control his racing heart. Who are you? Danny demanded, proud that his voice only trembled slightly. I am High Commander Rethix, the warrior said, military and protector of the Volanthi race, and I have been watching you poison our Empress with your human weakness. Danny pressed his back against the wall, acutely aware of how small and fragile he was compared to this towering alien soldier. I'm not poisoning anyone, Danny said. She asked me to teach her, and I'm just answering her questions. Rethix leaned closer, and his breath was hot against Danny's face. You are spreading a disease, the commander hissed. This hope you speak of, this stubborn refusal to accept reality, this is not strength, this is madness, and it has already begun to infect the subject races throughout our empire. Danny felt his fear beginning to transform into anger. Maybe they deserve to hope, he said. Maybe being conquered doesn't mean you have to give up your spirit. Rethix grabbed Danny by the throat and lifted him off the ground as easily as a human might lift a small child. I have seen what happens when humans are left unchecked, the commander snarled. Rebellions on mining colonies, escapes from labor camps, whispered legends spreading from world to world about a species that cannot be tamed. Danny struggled to breathe as the grip tightened. Your kind is a virus, Rethix continued, and I will not allow you to infect our empire any further. He released Danny suddenly, letting him fall to the ground in a gasping heap. "Leave now," Rethix commanded. "Take one of our ships and return to your pathetic vessel and your insignificant home, and never speak of what you have learned here." Danny pulled himself up to his knees, rubbing his bruised throat. "And if I don't?" he asked, his voice hoarse but defiant. Rethix smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression Danny had ever seen. "Then I will find a reason to destroy Earth," the commander said simply. "Your planet will burn, your colonies will be scattered to the void, and every human in the galaxy will know that their extinction came because one foolish mechanic refused to know his place." The commander turned and walked away, leaving Danny alone in the darkness, with fear and fury battling for control of his heart. The next day, Danny went to see Empress Valora in her private chambers, a place he had never been invited before, and what she told him made everything more complicated. "I know about Rethix's visit," she said, and there was no surprise in her voice. "He has been opposing my decisions for centuries, but he has never dared to threaten one under my protection." "He said he would destroy Earth," Danny replied, still shaken by the memory. "He cannot do so without my permission," Valora said, "but I must be honest with you, Danny Cole, because the situation is more serious than you know." She gestured for him to sit, and when he did, she began to pace back and forth across the room with an agitation he had never seen in her. "Before, the Valanthi Empire is dying," she said, "not from war or disease or external threat, but from within, from stagnation and boredom and the slow decay of a civilization that has forgotten how to grow." Danny listened in silence as she continued. "We have conquered every enemy, solved every problem, achieved every goal, and now we have nothing left to strive for, and without struggle, without challenge, without the possibility of failure, my people are losing the will to continue." She stopped pacing and faced him with those ancient starlight eyes. "I believe humanity holds the key to saving us," she said. "Your capacity for hope, your determination to create meaning in a universe that offers none. This is what we have lost, and this is what I need you to help me restore." Danny felt the weight of her words pressing down on him. "But Rethix will never allow it," he said. "Rethix fears change because change threatens his power." Replied, "He has built his entire existence on conquest and domination. And if my people learn to hope as humans do, they might begin to question why we conquer at all." Danny thought about this for a long moment. "What do you want me to do?" he asked. "Continue your lessons," Valora said, "but also, I need you to show my empire what humanity truly is, not through words alone, but through action." She told him of her plan, a grand gathering of the court, where Danny would demonstrate human spirit in a way that could not be denied. But Danny knew that one person alone could not accomplish this. That note, with the help of a palace servant named Orin, who had grown sympathetic to Danny during his stay, he managed to send a secret message across the stars to the horizon's edge. The message was simple: "I need your help, and so does humanity." Weeks passed as Danny continued his lessons with the Empress, while secretly working with Orin to prepare for what was to come. And during that time he learned that the servant had his own reasons for helping. "My people were conquered 3,000 years ago," Orin told him one night as they worked together in a hidden room beneath the palace. "We used to create beautiful music, songs that could make listeners weep with joy or sorrow. But the Valanthi forbade our traditions, and now my people have forgotten how to sing." "Why are you helping me?" Danny asked. "Because I have heard the stories about humans," Orin replied. "Stories of a species that refuses to forget, that passes down hope from generation to generation, no matter how dark things become. And I want my people to remember how to hope again." Far across the galaxy, Katie Morgan received Danny's message aboard the Horizon's Edge, and she did not hesitate. She contacted every human colony she could reach, every ship, every outpost, every group of scattered humans trying to survive in a hostile universe. Told them what was happening. "Danny needs us," she said in her broadcast. "And this might be our only chance to show the galaxy who we really are." The response was overwhelming. Humans from dozens of worlds began preparing, gathering their music and their stories and their art, preparing to broadcast a message of hope that would reach across the stars and into the heart of the Volanthe Empire itself. And as the day of the grand gathering approached, Danny watched the Empress with new eyes, seeing not just an ancient and powerful ruler, but a being who was desperately searching for something she had lost so long ago that she barely remembered what it was. "Are you ready?" Valora asked him on the morning of the gathering. Danny thought about everything that had happened, about the threats and the danger and the impossible odds, and he smiled. "Humans are always ready," he said, "even when we're not." The Empress looked at him with something that might have been affection. "That," she said quietly, "is exactly what I mean." The court of 1,000 stars was filled beyond capacity, with representatives from every corner of the Empire crowded into the vast chamber to witness what High Commander Rethix had promised would be the final judgment of humanity. Danny stood in the center of the room, wearing the same ceremonial robes he had worn on his first day in this place, and he could feel the hostile stares of countless aliens boring into him from every direction. Rethix stood at the front of the assembly, his silver armor gleaming and his voice booming across the chamber as he addressed the gathered crowd. "For too long our Empress has been deceived by this creature," the commander declared. "He has filled her mind with dangerous ideas, with talk of hope and struggle and meaning, concepts that threaten the very foundation of our civilization." The crowd murmured in agreement, and Danny could see fear and anger on the faces of species he had never seen before. Beings who had learned to hate humanity through centuries of propaganda. "I have compiled evidence of human treachery throughout the Empire," Rethix continued. "Rebellions on mining colonies, escapes from labor camps, sabotage of military installations. All of it traced back to this disease of hope that humans spread wherever they go." He turned to face Empress Valora, who sat upon her crystal throne with an expression that revealed nothing. "I demand that your majesty declare humanity a threat to imperial security," Rethix said. "I demand authorization to eliminate this virus once and for all, starting with their homeworld and ending with every scattered colony in the galaxy." The chamber fell silent, waiting for the Empress to respond, and Danny felt his heart pounding so loudly that he was sure everyone could hear it. But before Valora could speak, the massive view screens that lined the walls of the chamber flickered to life. Rethix spun around in confusion as images began to appear, not military footage or propaganda, but something entirely different. A little girl appeared on the screens, a human child no more than 7 years old, sitting in what looked like a cramped mining colony, with walls of bare metal and lights that flickered uncertainly. She was holding a violin, an old instrument that looked like it had been repaired dozens of times, and she began to play. The music that filled the court of 1,000 stars was not technically perfect, and the girl made mistakes and had to restart certain passages. But there was something in the melody that made the assembled aliens stop and listen. It was a song of hope, a simple tune that spoke of better days and distant dreams. And Danny watched as beings who had conquered galaxies fell silent before the sound of a child's violin. The image changed to an old man sitting in what was clearly a prison cell, his face lined with age and hardship, and he began to recite poetry in a voice that trembled but never broke. "We are the dreamers of dreams," he said. "We are the movers and shakers of the world, forever it seems. And we build up empires of glory and break them with our words." More images appeared, humans from across the galaxy, sharing their music and their stories and their art. and the chamber filled with the sound of humanity refusing to be silenced. Danny saw Katie Morgan appear on one of the screens, standing on the bridge of the horizon's edge with tears streaming down her face. "We are humanity," she said, her voice carrying across light years of space to reach this ancient court. "We do not conquer, and we do not surrender. We endure, and we create, and we love, and we hope." She looked directly into the camera, and Danny felt as if she were looking directly at him. "If you give us the chance," Katie continued, "we will teach you how to live again." The broadcasts continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, showing humans from every colony and ship and outpost in the Empire, all of them sharing the same message of hope and determination. When the screens finally went dark, the court of 1,000 stars was utterly silent. Rethix broke the silence first, his voice harsh with fury. "This proves my point," he shouted. "They have organized across the entire empire. They are coordinating resistance. They must be destroyed before they destroy us." But the crowd did not respond with the anger he expected, and Danny saw something new on the faces of the assembled aliens, something that looked almost like wonder. Empress Valora rose from her throne, and the movement commanded instant attention from every being in the room. "For 10,000 years," she said, her voice echoing through the chamber like music, "we have ruled through fear and force and the absolute certainty of our superiority." She descended the steps of her throne and walked toward the center of the room where Danny stood. "And for 10,000 years," she continued, "we have been slowly dying, not from any external threat, but from the loss of everything that once made us great." She stopped beside Danny and placed her hand on his shoulder. "This human has shown me what we have forgotten," Valora said. "The will to struggle against impossible odds, the courage to create beauty in the darkest times, the stubborn hope that tomorrow might be better than today." She turned to face Rethix, and her eyes blazed with power that made even the commander step back. "You call this a disease," she said, "but I call it the cure for what ails us all." "Your Majesty cannot mean," Rethix began. "Silence," Valora commanded, and the word carried such force that the commander physically staggered. "I have made my decision," the Empress announced, her voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. "Humanity will not be designated as a threat, and they will not be destroyed or further enslaved." The crowd stirred with confusion and uncertainty. "Instead," Valora continued, "I am declaring humanity to be allies of the Volanthi Empire, the first true allies we have ever had, partners rather than subjects, equals rather than conquered." Gasps and shouts filled the chamber, but Valora raised her hand, and silence fell once more. "And as for you, High Commander Rethix," she said, turning to face the stunned warrior, "you are stripped of your command and your rank, and you will spend the remainder of your days learning what this human has taught me about the value of hope." Guards moved forward to escort Rethix away, and the commander went without resistance, too shocked to fight. Valora turned to Danny with something in her eyes that looked almost like gratitude. "You have given me a gift beyond price," she said quietly. "You have reminded me why I became Empress in the first place, to protect and guide my people, not to crush and dominate them." "What happens now?" Danny asked, still hardly believing what had just occurred. "Now we begin again," Valora replied. "We learn from humanity, we remember how to dream and create and hope, and perhaps together we can build something better than either of our peoples could build alone." She looked out at the assembled court, at the representatives of 100 species who had just witnessed something unprecedented. "I offer my hand in friendship to humanity," she declared, "not as a conqueror to the conquered, but as an ally to an ally, as a student to a teacher, as one dreamer to another." Danny felt tears running down his cheeks, tears of relief and joy and overwhelming hope. "We accept," he said, and his voice was steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "But on one condition." The chamber held its breath. "Humanity will never kneel," Danny said. We will stand beside you as equals, as partners in a shared future. Friends and equals. We will never bow before anyone." Empress Valora looked at him for a long moment, and then she did something that had not happened in 10,000 years of Volanthi history. She smiled, a genuine expression of warmth and respect, and something that might have been the beginning of hope. "I would expect nothing less," she said. Years later, the galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. Human art hung in Volanthi museums, and Volanthi scholars studied on Earth, and the empire that had once been built on conquest was slowly transforming into something new, something better. And in the palace on Caliph Prime, Danny Cole sat beside an alien empress in a garden of wonders. No longer a mechanic, or a prisoner, or even an ambassador, but simply a friend. "Tell me another story," Valora said, her eyes bright with the hope she had learned to feel. Danny smiled and began to speak, sharing the endless tales of human triumph and tragedy and stubborn survival that had changed an empire. Because that was the most human lesson of all, he realized, that greatness was not born from power or conquest or domination, but from something far simpler and far more enduring: the refusal to give up, no matter what. And that was a lesson the galaxy would never forget.